entrar. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for being here physically and online. We're here today to discuss the Leadership for Net Zero initiative launched in COP27 by Club de Madrid. I am Adriana Rodriguez. I am a researcher at the climate strategy firm in Madrid, and I am leading the business working group together with our CEO, Peter Sweetman, of this initiative. But here today we have the three working groups represented. I am here joined by Carlos Alvarado, President of Costa Rica from 2018 to 2022, and also a member of Club de Madrid. We also have here Marina Bragante, Executive Director of Aya Earth Partners. Raikun Chung, Board Director of the Ban Ki-moon Foundation for a Better Future and former Climate Change Ambassador for Korea. Elena Viñez Fiestas, Commissioner of the Spanish Financial Markets Authority and Chair of the EU Sustainable Platform and Sustainable Finance Platform. And Anthony Balagriga, Global Head of Responsible Business at BBVA. I now will give the word to you, President Alvarado, as a member of Club de Madrid, to explain to us what the Leadership for Net Zero initiative is and to introduce us to what Club de Madrid is too. Thank you, and please.
Thank you, Adriana, and thank you all for being here, and also to the panelists. It's a privilege to be here. Club de Madrid, it's an organization that puts together, it's the largest forum of democratic leaders or former leaders of countries like myself. So it's the largest forum that gathers presidents and prime ministers with a very vast experience in different continents and parts of the world. And one of the tasks that Club now has to do with challenging the situation that we're living with, climate change. And we're doing it with this initiative, particularly the initiative of leadership for net zero. And we have put together 3 groups, actually. And the people you see on the panel and many others, specialists from business, from academia, with experience in policymaking, in government, have worked in those 3 working groups, civil society, on government and political leadership, public leadership, and private sector leadership, to come up with recommendations to address the challenge of net zero. Why leadership is so relevant nowadays? It's not going to be inertia that's going to drive the change we need for the planet. Nowadays, sometimes we tend to be very bleak and anxious with what we see. And I do believe we need to be very concerned. We're breaking many records on the planet in terms of temperature, in terms of drought, in terms of heat, in terms of flooding, in terms of sea level rise. I don't believe we should not be somehow alarmed, but never should we be paralyzed. We need to act. Whenever people say in this context of anxiety or feeling negative about it, I also tend to talk about the COP process. If you think about a key accomplishment like the Paris Agreement, it's not been yet 10 years of the Paris Agreement. If you think about many of those deliverables that on how the conversation has shifted since then, you can see progress. And that progress is mainly driven by leadership. And not only leadership in government, but leadership across the board. I look at myself and our experience in government. In 2019, we launched the Costa Rican Decarbonization Plan. Back then, it was the first decarbonization plan in the world. First plan in the world, 2019. Now, to talk about decarbonization plan, it's something normal that countries ought to do. So that shows and demonstrates that leadership can push the direction forward, and it's necessary, and we need it. So what we try to work in these 3 different groups, it's recommendations on where to put those efforts on leadership to achieve net zero. And for that, I believe the panelists, the different specialists, are really well equipped to share some of those conclusions. So I'll leave that there, Adriana, and for all the panelists to go into more detail of the program.
Thank you, President. As the President has specified here, we have a really good panel. And we're going to answer a few questions now that I'm going to pose to each of you. And you have around 7 minutes to answer, more or less, average. thank you for your compliance in advance. So my first question is directed to Ambassador Chung. Ambassador, you are part of the policy working group, and you're leading under the leadership of Korean Prime Minister Han Seong-soo a set of recommendations that include bringing a sustainable consumption pattern to the agenda as critical for the global net reduction of emissions. You also are bringing recommendations to reverse the negative mitigation growth narrative into a positive win-win synergy narrative. And you're also looking to accelerate the global discourse on carbon pricing. My question to you is then, how should countries that are starting from different points in terms of economic development, but also of different energy models, can address these recommendations that you're posing from the policy working group?
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much for the invitation. And I've been working with the Prime Minister Han Seong-soo, and our idea was from the beginning, we should give some strategic message because Club de Madrid is a senior group. And the senior group should send out something very strategic that can break away the roadblocks that is blocking the progress. I have been involved in climate negotiations since '91. I negotiated UNFCCC, and I attended too many COPs. And so, you know, the Paris Climate Agreement, net zero, is not the first time we made a very ambitious commitments. We repeated making ambitious commitments, but we didn't deliver as much as we wanted. Like UNFCCC, by 2000, we are supposed to deliver stabilization by 1990 level, but we only partially succeeded about it. And the Kyoto Protocol, likewise, also we could not deliver as we promised. Even it was ratified by except one country. And then we had a Copenhagen Accord, 2009. We also had a very ambitious pledges by the government, just like the Paris Climate Agreement. It was a voluntary pledge. But the Copenhagen Accord was once again almost forgotten. And so we were thinking, what should be the strategic message to be sent out that could remove those deadlock and roadblocks. And our conclusion is that, first of all, we have been focusing too much on emission from production. We didn't focus much about on emission of consumption. What I mean by that, our UNFCCC, IPCC standard is based on GDP. But GDP means production. But in the world global trade, 25% of the production is traded. Typically, European Union is importing a lot, especially energy-intensive products from many developing countries. And then European Union is only reporting much lower than their consumption as their responsible emission. But look at the country like, for example, China. China is reporting based on their GDP, but they are consuming more than 10% less than their production. But China is responsible for the production. This is a very interesting, strange dilemma. And then producers are responsible, while the consumers are not responsible in many cases. So how can we focus on sustainable consumption pattern on the table? This sustainable consumption pattern was not very much discussed on the UN COPs, as far as I remember. We've very much focused on the production patterns, production issues. So this is also, there are a lot of carbon leakage issue. Carbon leakage, I don't have time to go on. So for net global reduction, we have to reduce our consumption, not just only focusing on production. So this is a dilemma. So we have to, I'm not suggesting the answer. I'm raising the message that we have to focus on sustainable consumption pattern if we are going to realize net global reduction. Just focusing on and framing developing country energy-intensive production as the source of the problem is not a solution. We have to also think about wasteful consumption. of the developed country. But very little attention has been paid about the unsustainable consumption pattern everywhere. So this is the first point. Second point, the carbon pricing issue. I heard the previous session about carbon market. It's a huge issue, so I don't have time to go about it. But my only message in this session is that many people think as if carbon pricing means just the carbon market and the carbon tax. But that's not true. We have many gradual, step-by-step, that can internalize the carbon price into our investment and the consumption pattern. There are many ways of doing it, like a social cost of carbon. It's a very interesting concept. Many governments are already doing it. But still the level of the carbon pricing we are internalizing much, much lower than expected. I don't have to repeat about it. So my point is, we are too much afraid about carbon pricing. But I'm suggesting that there are many gradual, intermediate, step-by-step approaches available. We have to exploit a lot more about it. That's the second point. The third point is that we are too much afraid about mitigation is killing economic growth. Everybody in this conference still dominated by the perception that mitigation means reduction of economic growth. This perception is so strong everywhere. All the politicians are believing this story. I don't have to mention certain name of a certain country. Maybe one big country might withdraw again if somebody was elected again because of this kind of a very strong perception. But is it true? Is it true? Nobody questions, but so many economists are generating, producing so many negative projections based on static CGE modeling about cost and benefit analysis about energy transition investment. But I'm suggesting we have to focus on clean energy transition investment is an opportunity for growth. In the short run, energy transition could be a cost, but in the long run, it is an economic growth opportunity. So we have to change our perception. So I'm suggesting to Club Madrid is that we should initiate another very strong initiative to change the mindset of the politicians, general public, business, even the journalists. Because journalists are always sending out very sensational, negative headlines that mitigation is killing the economy. But when other institutions sending out positive message, it will never carry the journalist headline. It never carries it. This is certain bias in the journalism as well. So it's an uneven playing ground. It's very unfair. So we have to do something about it. It needs a political leadership. All these issues I'm talking about needs a political leadership. The third point I'm going to suggest, my last point is, we need a price differentiation between clean energy and the fossil fuel energy. Because to provide a voluntary choice for the climate-concerned consumers to choose. But unfortunately, in many countries, maybe except in Europe and the United States, there are certain liberalization of the electric market. So the prices are different, people can choose. But it's not everywhere. Almost all countries around the world, in developing world, the electric price is a monopoly, just giving a one price, and the consumers do not have a choice to choose clean energy. So I'm suggesting is, I'm actually consulting, providing advice to Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan, and I'm actually trying to activate this idea there because they support accept my idea. My idea is very simple. Why don't we provide a green premium tariff for solar energy, wind energy, higher price, and fossil fuel energy lower price? Because in those countries, unlike some European countries, renewable energy is still a lot more expensive than fossil fuel energy. So they offer them premium tariff rate for green energy so that business, responsible business, and the consumers, climate-concerned consumer, can voluntarily choose to consume by paying higher price. Then you might wonder, who will pay higher price? But I will hear from the responsible business group later. I had a very interesting discussion with the Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola will be more than happy to buy green energy to pay higher price. Why? It will be a very strong marketing tool for Coca-Cola saying that my Coke is carbon-free Coke. Then young generations will love it. So my point is, there are a huge groundswell of climate-sensitive, concerned young generation. They are looking for products with the carbon-free. So even though it could mean a little bit higher price, even Uzbekistan, even in Kazakhstan, I'm speaking to university students, but they are even saying that, we are willing to pay higher price for carbon-free products. But unfortunately, the problem is, there is no differentiated price, whether green product or fossil product, the same price. So there's no choice available. That's the problem, including in Korea. In Korea, 48% of the Korean people willing to pay twice the electricity price for climate change issues. But in Korea, we have only one price. We don't have two price. So these people cannot pay higher price for green energy. So we need a differentiated price system to give an opportunity for the consumers. But regarding your question, how this can be applied in developing countries, of course, it's hugely difficult for many developing countries. But many of these messages can play open up a new opportunity, like a green growth opportunity. As a director in the UN, I was a pioneer of a green growth idea. 2005, I initiated green growth from UN ESCA in Bangkok, Asia Pacific. So I was trying to disseminate that mitigation is an economic growth opportunity. I've been trying to do it since 2005, but still it is a losing battle. I was not able to win the game. So I need the support from Club de Madrid. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. You've mentioned two important players, consumers and specifically big companies that are looking to consume in a net zero way, and investment finance, right? That to execute, to make sure that these policies see the light of implementation. So my next question is therefore for you, Elena. You're part of the policy working group, but you're also part of the business working group. So you're a good bridge to discuss how companies and banks can actually play a role in the transition and allow us to reach the policy climate targets that we have set for ourselves. Just for some background, the business working group is formed by 11 global companies and one bank, BBVA, next to Elena. And they are looking into how they can mobilize resources to decarbonize their Scope 3 emissions, which are actually on average 75% of a company's total emissions. So they're very important to target. They're the next step to net zero. And in a way, what these companies are doing to approach this is talking to their suppliers and to their clients, engaging with them, getting data from them, and trying to align them with a net zero pathway through, for instance, research and development collaborations, through technical assistance, and through helping them purchasing clean technologies. So this is what the working group 2 is looking into. And now, Elena, for you as a question, I would like to know how you think the policy working group recommendations and the business working group recommendations are relevant for one meeting that is happening in half an hour, the Global Finance Ministers' high-level meeting on how to scale climate finance. How do you think we can inform their recommendations?
Thank you, Adriana, and good morning to everyone. For full disclosure, I should say that I was part of the Leadership for Net Zero work, and I'm here today as a member of the UN high-level expert group that Secretary General created last year, and we published during COP27 a report called Integrity Matters. And why I'm saying this is because Integrity Matters, in a way, was the base for the business working group, right? So in Integrity Matters, we came up with 10 recommendations, very clear, very straight to the point on how to make net zero pledges of non-state actors credible. Now, a theme throughout the entire report was Scope 3. one of the elephants in the room. Yeah? And the importance of Scope 3 and how we were very clear in the report is that no pledge, no transition plan, no targets and no emissions reductions are credible if you don't include the entire Scope 3. We understand that it's not as simple as it sounds, and there are real issues on calculating Scope 3. That said, you need to be really transparent about what is the percentage that you're calculating, how much is based in estimates, and what those estimates, which methodology you're using. So this is about full transparency. We fully understand the complexities behind it. Yeah? And why I'm mentioning this is because the report and the business, and I'm going to concentrate because this is for the financial minister, first on the business working group. So Scope 3, as most of you would know, has the upstream and the downstream side, right? When it comes to the downstream, the product sold, let's be honest, yeah? There's no way around it. I mean, for the oil and gas industry, that's 80% of its emissions. This is about the product or the service that you produce or you write. So the direct link on responsibility, for me, it's linked and is out of questions. Also, we have in Scope 3 finance emissions. Yeah, that's the financial industry. We need to understand that for the financial industry, we're talking about maybe 700 times the sum up of the rest of emissions. So it's the core of the emissions. So that's why it is so important. But the report looks at, and is very clear about it, about Scope 3 upstream. So that is the supply chain management. And then on the supply chain management, we're more looking at the rest of the sectors, like the textiles, the retail apparel, and so forth, for which is calculated around 11.4 times the rest, the Scope 1, so the sum up of Scope 1 and Scope 2. Now, what is very interesting about Scope 3 and the relationship between those companies and the emissions on the suppliers is that they are partially responsible because they have purchasing practices, because they have procurement policies and strategies, but at the same time, we need to be conscious of the impact of those policies on the suppliers, and that those suppliers and value chains might be global. They might come from, from very small, small growers, for example, like, coffee growers, to large companies. So it's very heterogeneous. The impact of changing your purchasing practice can have an impact, also a social impact. So therefore, it's more complex, if you wish. And one thing I really like about the report is that it really looks at what's the best practices happening, what are the innovation tools, and it really promotes collaboration and learning, yeah? So this is not about divesting from 9 today and changing your supply chain. It's about how you can engage with them. This is like investment, right? Engaging and divesting. Of course, at some point, maybe you decide to change your supplier if it doesn't react, but it's really about moving forward. And why is that so important for a financial minister? I would say because the gross of the supply chains is conformed by SMEs. The gross of the labor markets, generally speaking, is conformed with SMEs, and a big proportion of GDP as well. And we need to start understanding that the net zero, the transition to net zero would not happen without the SMEs. And we need to start understanding what is the interlink between what we're asking financial institutions and large companies and the impact on the SMEs, and how do we bring them together. So that's what I think that the report is so useful. It's short and sharp, goes straight to the point, gives very concrete recommendations. Now, if I move to the world of financial regulation and I think about the experience in Europe and what I've been working on, we need to understand that for SMEs, the gross of their financing, when it's external, comes from banks. Public banks and private banks. And those banks, even the public, for example, in Europe, now they're starting to put, some green layers. Let's go there like that. In Europe, it has been very much the case with the recovery funds, with the do no significant harm principles. Now, the private banks, in return, now, at least in Europe, they have to disclose, right? They need to start disclosing, conforming to the regulation, a whole series of environmental, social, and governance indicators. So they start asking, of course, their clients, and they say, you need to provide me with this information. At the same time, many of these SMEs are part of a value chain of large companies that they themselves now have to report and have to comply, whereas the EU taxonomy or is the European sustainability reporting standards. So SMEs are feeling all these pressures, all these demands of different type of indicators, different times, and they're a little bit lost. Let's be honest on that, right? And they really need support. So that's the value added on that. With that, I feel, if I still have 1 minute, want to talk about what we're doing in terms of my other hat, the chair of the European Platform Sustainable Finance. The European Commission, right next to us, issue a plan for supporting SMEs and to helping to boosting access to finance from also that means access to sustainable finance. And on that front, we developed what is called a simplified approach, which means that EFRAG, which are the developers of the European sustainability standards, are working on a simplified sustainability standards, voluntary, but basically reducing the number of indicators to like the must-have. Us as a platform, what we've done is we look at the taxonomy and said, okay, which criteria of the taxonomy has an impact in the value chain on companies, and actually define those and providing them to EFRAG for them to include in the standards. And that's what is very important, is that it will go alongside telling which sectors, if you are in this sector, if you conduct these economic activities, this is what your client might ask you, right? And then the third thing is we're also looking at how to apply the taxonomy on a voluntary basis, what sort of taxonomy would apply for SMEs. So overall, trying to say, we'll come up with a set of simplified standards for SMEs, and then tell the banks, when you look at SMEs, this is the information, the indicators, your shopping list, basically. And the same for financial market participants and the large companies. So trying to really narrow it down and then support.
Thank you, Lena. I think you can all guess what my next question is going to be. Just to clarify, the report that Elena is talking about is not published yet. It's in a draft form. We're using this event and COP28 to provide input for that report, and we will publish it next year. But you will be able to find the executive summary with the preliminary findings, let's say. So my next question is exactly about what Elena mentioned, collaboration between the financial sector and corporates, to be able to make those lost SMEs a bit less lost, let's say. So Tony, you're global head of responsible business in BBVA. BBVA has been doing quite a lot on providing supply chain finance to corporates. As Elena has mentioned already, these products are usually targeting SMEs because they're usually more than 50% of the supply chain. In some of the sectors of the companies that are in the working group, they can be even the 80% of the supply chain, and many of them are the highest emitting players that big companies need to target. And many times what we find is that they don't understand even how to calculate their carbon footprint, right? And how to finance decarbonization in their companies. So, Tony, you have this challenge, right, which is helping your big clients decarbonize their supply chain, but also you have, as Elena has mentioned, the finance emissions challenge, downstream scope 3.
Yep.
Tell us how you're approaching this, and especially how these two can align to be able to decarbonize all your finance emissions.
Oh, well, great to be here. Thanks for the invitation, and also great honor to participate in this paper that the Club de Madrid is developing. So, and yes, as a financial institution, our priority is obviously our finance emissions. I say how we can help our clients to decarbonize. Obviously, we have a footprint in our supply chain, but our contribution to this paper, to this work, has been focusing on how we can help our clients in this journey, no? And yes, let's remind practically that 8 value chains accounts 50% of emissions in the world. No? 8 industries practically cover 50% of the emissions. So if we tackle the value chain of our clients in those sectors like food, fashion, building materials and others, it is a really, really great impact we can have. No? And I agree with Elena that, I mean, as banks, as companies, we have a key role to play to mobilize the SMEs, and a lot of those supply chain is a good way to arrive to the SMEs through the value chain, no? Through the value chain of our clients. No? And that's what we are doing as a banking sector, as BBVA also. We are promoting this financial solution, which at the end of the day, it consists to help our clients to decarbonize the supply chain. We have to work with our clients normally to set the criteria and the metrics that we want to measure, to follow, to define different segments of the supply chain, and the worst performance and the best performance will have better or different interest rate of the financing that we are providing to the suppliers. No? So that's very powerful because it provides incentives for those SMEs that are on the value chain of a big corporation to decarbonize. We also complement this pricing mechanism with training and advisory services. And also at the end, we provide investment for the CapEx, because at the end of the day, if we are a supplier delivering products and services to a specific big corporate that have net zero commitment, if you are not providing performance very well, you will be good to invest in certain assets to improve your assessment. So it's a good way to create an ecosystem to help big corporations to decarbonize the value chain. No? We think that it's a very powerful tool. I would say that not only for developed countries, but especially relevant on emerging economies. Let's think about that we have very relevant global value chains across the globe. So it's a good way to reach thousands and thousands of SMEs. If we have a sustainable supply chain finance with Nestlé Mexico with 1,500 employees, or with Cemex in Mexico, also with 3,000 suppliers, no? Also with Acciona in Spain, also in Peru. So thanks to this agreement with our corporate clients, we can reach thousands and thousands of SMEs to get them on the journey, no, to net zero. No? I think this is something that is very, very, very powerful. So we would like to see more support from the MDBs, from the multinational development banks, to provide, let's say, the risking mechanism, also to provide training and support in order to have a more ambitious solution to reach to the next level. No? So I think that's very important. And then, as you said, this is only one part of our net zero journey. We as a bank, our main impact is through our finance, also with our facilitated emissions that we are going to, in the near future, obviously also we will have to set targets on the facilitated emissions. We have already set targets in key sectors. We are already delivering those targets. We have included these targets into our variable compensation. 15% of our variable compensation of the top 400 employees are linked to the decarbonization targets at sector level. And this type of supply chain finance is one of the tools that we may have. We have obviously use of proceeds financing, but also we can have KPI financing through solutions like this that can be very powerful when we want to reach SMEs. No? I think that's a very way to make it smarter and linked to the simplification that we need to have for SMEs. But I think the way to mobilize the value chain of the corporate clients through financing is a good way to mobilize the change.
Thank you, Tony. Great. Now I want to start putting a bit the pieces of the puzzle together with a question to President Alvarado, because you're part of the civil society working group. That's the third working group of the initiative, which is focusing on how to enable a just transition with the different tools that companies and businesses and politicians can bring to the table, right? And you've been also following closely the policy and business working group. So my question to you is, based on your experience, what you've been hearing from the panelists on how the different actors have different responsibilities and capacities to help more vulnerable communities and players, how can all of them, governments, private sector, and civil society, work together to accelerate the clean energy transition and, at the same time, ensure public support for clean energy policies?
Well, that's a tough one. But that's the one that we need to answer, actually. And so far, I'm very pleased with what I've listened from our panelists and that are contributing to our report, and I'm looking forward also to listen to Marina. I want to link that question to leadership. one element, complexity. We're dealing here with high levels of complexity and multivariable scenarios and multi-stakeholders. And I believe, as Dr. Schum mentioned, there is not one solution fits all. And we have to have that very clear, particularly in the energy transition. Decarbonization, and I said that a lot, decarbonization is a must. But we cannot decarbonize and end up in a polarized world. That's why the transition is critical. Because many countries in the international niche of whatever they do, some are key suppliers of fossil fuels and others are in the demand part of the equation. So the game is different. Some need to very quickly, the energy transition for some is very quickly diversify their economies because they cannot run out of business. And many countries in the developing world in Latin America are there. And for others, decarbonization is how to decarbonize their production because they are consumers of fossil fuels. So scenarios are a little bit different. Complexity, no one solution fits all. Something that's not mentioned enough, empathy then, because we need to be empathic of the different pathways, both countries, businesses, people need to, this adaptation journey we are all crossing, we need to be empathic. Let me tell you my own experience with that. When we work with decarbonization, I mean, we were just pushing for it very hard. And I used to say decarbonization is for the future of my planet, for the future of my children, of my son. But then I looked to myself and said, well, but Costa Rica is a country with 99% clean and renewable energy. And we don't need to decarbonize, let's say, many sources that others have. Many people, when think about loving their children, think that their livelihoods depends on fossil fuels. So if we want to meet in some place leadership, we need to be empathic about that pathway. And that brings us to collaboration. Leadership has to be there. That's why all these kind of solutions have to be discussed. And what we have listened, we say, oh, I need that tool. But somebody might say, that does not necessarily apply for me like that. We have to be empathic to understand that. Another point that I love that Dr. Schum made, which I believe it's at the core of the discussion. And there's a tension now conceptually, and it's all around. There are lots of elephants in the room, but that's another one. Green growth, and many, especially in the so-called global north, but in Europe particularly, talk about degrowth as a mean to tackle climate change. Green growth versus degrowth. In the so-called global south, degrowth is not a discussion. For reasons that you're not going to politically campaign to degrowth when you need to bring benefit to the people. I think it has to do with livelihoods at the end. Again, empathy. What's the role of growth, what's the role of business? It's the role to give dignity to the lives of people at the end of the day. For some, could be accumulate until the infinite. Let's not think of that now. It's to provide dignity and livelihoods to people. Then we have a place where we meet on that. So that leadership in this multi-complex scenario, I think has to point to that and not to fix solutions. It's adaptable solutions that are impacted not only understanding my challenges, but the other challenge. And empathy, acting in good faith, which is something that we need for this to happen in the appropriate way. Good faith, that we are acting in understanding that it's not only about my well-being, but the others' well-being. That scenario is the best scenario. One final point that I want to mention, because in this I feel I'm preaching in that part, but let me preach a little bit. I'm not an economist, But when I took economy back in the university, I remember very clearly they talk about growth, putting the classical view of growth that you plug capital, you plug labor, and you plug land. Then you have growth. That was a very... What I'm seeing also now is that the means of growth in certain industries, think about automatization, artificial intelligence, is intensive in capital, not necessarily in labor. And the labor is very specialized. I'm thinking about inequalities between developed and developing world. That will drive a growth that's very intensive on capital. How are we going to manage that equation again in the energy transition and in the climate context? Also thinking that what the point I made earlier, what's the role of business? To look for dignity in livelihoods for people. But what happens when people is not part of that equation? Again, like Dr. Chung mentioned, that's more of a problem than a solution. But I think those are the questions we need into this leadership to put there, especially the ones that are tough, we need to address. Those that are tough, we need to address. And we need to find perhaps common ground. What's on the middle of those debates? So I see the work of these three groups to put the debate there. But when we feel uncomfortable, then go back to empathy. It's to go back to empathy, understand that we're trying to build a better world for all. And I think we're missing that a lot. But I think this report is trying to address that. So I'm hopeful for that.
Thank you, President. Exactly. Very inspiring, and it reminds us again about something we usually forget, which is all of this is for people, right? And that takes me to the next panelist, Marina. How we can empower people, how we can be empathetic with people, but especially with vulnerable communities. That's the focus of your citizen leadership working group. And in your working group, you propose to empower them through participation mechanisms. You can explain us now which ones you can think of that should be further empowered in a way to influence all the decisions that we've been talking about here, right? Finance, companies, policy making. How can we empower them through participatory mechanisms?
Thank you, Adriana. So it's not easy to talk after a former president, especially an empathetic one, right? But since he was in our group, I think we go to the same route. So I want to especially start thanking Club de Madrid for the opportunity. Also the members of our group. When we were selecting who we wanted to be part of the group, we thought about having different ages, different races, and different parts of the globe to have like a very diverse perspective. And third, I want to thank Beatriz, who is here and really helped me on writing our recommendation paper. So thank you. So we, civil society, are the voters and the consumers, right? So we have a lot of power in the table, but we are not aware of that yet. So we were thinking about having 3 special participation mechanisms. One of them, and the first one that I want to really bring to the table, is democracy and vote. So we need to ensure that we are voting and electing politicians that are committed to the climate change agenda. And since I arrived at COP, I have been speaking with Marina, who is a state legislator in São Paulo. And we are missing to see the parliament here, because we are focused on presidents or prime ministers, and we don't have the parliamentary voice. And they are the ones who decide about our budget, our next steps, our society. So I think we need to strengthening civil society, the power of voting and working in between elections, right? Because otherwise we only focus on campaign, and we need to be close to what's going on, what has been the key discussions that our parliaments, Congress, and executive branches are taking. The second one is investing in grassroots and universities to make sure that they are creating and raising capacity and strengthening the voice of vulnerable communities. We need to make sure that they are present in where the discussions are happening, but also when decisions are making, right? And also I bring COP again. When we see panels like this, that are more technical. We don't see civil society, diverse civil society sitting over there or over here. So we need to we need to build bridges between those panels that are happening when they are discussing leadership, racism, other topics that are more ideological, or other would say activist, with people that are really discussing financial mechanisms. How do we build bridges between those two worlds?
Complex.
And here is a very important financing and investing issue that we have philanthropies and government that give money for grassroots organizations, but then they have enough to work in a year, and you don't make society transformation in a year. And half of the year, they are trying to work for the next fundraise. So they actually work for like 6 months. So we need to be able to give money and invest in those organizations for a long period of time, so they really can work and make social transformation that we need. And then the third mechanism I would bring is communication. There are a lot of social media going on, and I don't think we in the climate change agenda are connected enough with the communication that people are assessing. So we need to be able to use those communications and bring and raise awareness between people of what they can do. Just a minute. And what are they able to change? And some of the mechanisms is communication and grassroots organization, and also democracy and vote together. I would bring the climate change assembly that are happening in Europe, in some countries of Europe. I would bring participation budgets that we have in Brazil. We were the first country, if I'm not mistaken, to really put that into action. And also prior consultations. And then, as I mentioned, those possibilities of participation, I really would like for us to make sure that they don't just happen so we can tick the box and say, oh, we did it, but for making sure that we listen and hear what has been said by the vulnerable communities. I think there's a special change here in leaders like former President Alvarado that are empathic and really want to listen to the differences that are being brought. And we need to be humble enough to know that we need to learn. We need to learn from young people, we need to learn from scientists, we need to learn from indigenous leaderships. And I don't see that really happening yet. I mean, we are working on it, but I think we need to go faster and change papers into action. I would say that.
Thank you, Marina. Now that we put all the pieces of the puzzle together, I wanted to ask one final question to finalize the session, and I'm going to ask you to be brief. We have around 10 minutes left, so more or less 2-3 minutes per person, except Elena that has requested me especially to have a bit more time. To frame the question, so the UN emissions gap report from 2023 says we have a 40% chance of keeping the 1.5 degree alive. And there's also a study from Bloomberg that finds that based on the current positions of countries here at COP28, there's a 3.6 chance out of 10 that we'll be able to make good progress in the negotiations and in the Paris Agreement. So this moment calls for, as you've been talking, innovative leadership, brave leadership, and decision-making to accelerate action. But what does that leadership does not look like? What do we want to avoid in the leaders of the world, whether that is politicians, whether that is companies, banks, or even civil society organizations? So I'm going to start again with Ambassador Chung, and we can do the same order.
Okay, thank you. I would like to focus on the specific mechanism and system to operationalize our ideas. We have been talking a lot about what should we do? But in fact, how can we make, for example, one of the most serious problems we are facing, to my assessment, is that consumers and civil society are very much left out. They are not the driver, and they don't have ownership. It's left to the government, politician, hand for politician, hand for big businesses. But what happened to the civil society? But the problem is, how can you do that? Then I'm suggesting differentiated price market. What I mean is that now the whole problem is happening because we have one fixed price. In the free market system, we have to compete for cheapest price. This is the source of the whole problem. Then how can you change it? Because in Korea, as you say, civil society, there are a lot of people are raising voice. But 45% of Koreans are opposing any action for climate. So civil society is not uniform, united. They even divide, only half and half. Only we can have just about half of the population supporting action, not just rhetoric. When it comes to paying the price, only less than half supporting it. So another half is opposing to pay the price for it. Then how can you do that? By offering a voluntary system that the consumers who are really concerned can show their willingness by paying the different price, not just the talking. But we need a different system. So differentiating the price so that consumers can make a voluntary choice. So this is, I think, to my assessment, is an initial first step to move towards sustainable market from free market. Sustainable market is about quality, sustainable quality. Free market is about cheapest quantity of the free market competition. So in order to move away from cheapest price competition towards highest quality competition, we have to have open up new opportunity for choice by the people to choose better quality carbon-free product, decarbonized product, so that consumers can exercise their power to choose carbon-free product, decarbonized product. But your question there, how many people will choose it? Yes, it's a big question. So maybe it could be 1% or 2% in the beginning. But I had a very interesting discussion with the governor of the Central Bank of Hungary. He told me 5% will be enough to change the society. So if the 5% of the society and the consumer choose to pay a higher price for a cleaner, carbon-free, decarbonized product, it will send out a big impact and it will change the whole society. That is his very positive assessment, but I agree with that. So what we need to do is we just do not need, environmental campaign is not enough. We need a social campaign of me first to pay the price of decarbonization. Sorry to
Thank
say
you,
too long.
Ambassador. Citizen leadership.
Sorry for that.
Great. So, Elena, what would you add to that?
Yeah. If you allow me, I'm going to first answer what leadership looks like. And for me, leadership looks like Antonio Gutierrez, the UN Secretary General, who speaks very loudly and goes straight to the key points. I think that we need to recognize the role that he has played in also putting on the center of the table the role of non-state actors when it comes to credible climate action. Now, what it doesn't look like is leadership that it's that type of leadership that avoids the elephants in the room that we've been talking about. We already talked about Scope 3. We talk about the consumption model. But we also need to talk about the phase out of fossil fuels. Let's be honest. Yeah. There's absolutely, which transition plan, whether you talk about a state or you talk about a company or a financial institution, is without having a strategy on how to phase down and out fossil fuels. And if you are expanding, particularly the investments on new infrastructure, that's new sources of emissions, that is definitely not credible and not a reflection of leadership. The other elephant in the room I would like to mention is the use of offsets from voluntary carbon markets. Yes, voluntary carbon markets have a play to role. Yes, we need to really boost the social and environmental integrity of those markets, and I would say the financial integrity as well. But hello, they cannot be a diversion for what the role of corporates should be. And the role of corporates is first and foremost to reduce real emissions. So therefore, if they're used, they need to be reported separately, and they cannot count to the realization of their interim reports. Last but not least, very brief, this is, the core of the work we did with the UNH-LEG and integrity matters was to put at the very center the importance of transition plans, right? Transition plans is what it details, needs to be really detailed, because what it's telling you is what exactly you plan to do, by when, and how you're going to get there. But it's absolutely fundamental that that transition plan looks at short-term objectives as well as long-term, that is fully aligned and consistent with what? With your governance, with your incentive schemes that Tony has talked about, with your financial planning. That's the core. One of the key points that we made in the report is that the way I know as a financial institution or supervisor that you are telling me the truth is by looking at your CapEx investments. And when your CapEx is aligned with the taxonomy in those regions where you have a taxonomy, now it gives me that a little bit more of teeth, of substance, because I know that your money, is where your mouth is. It's also fundamental that you report on the reduction of emissions, that you are accomplishing every year. And let's also add that both transition plans and the annual reporting, they need to be verified by an independent third party. In Europe now, it's been end of November that it's been published in the European journal, official journal. From now on, not only they will have to be reported, first from a limited assurance, verified, but in a few years' time, the demand is reasonable assurance. And that means the same level as financial reporting. With everything that implies, sustainability reporting has made it at the same level as financial reporting. And I will finish by saying that as we speak, there is a very important directive that is being negotiated in Europe, which is the due diligence directive. It has a very important article, which is transition plans. And why is that so important? Because then, if approved, as it was proposed, that means that in Europe, not only companies and financial institutions would have to report on a transition plan and provide a series of elements, but they will be mandatory to develop and adopt a transition plan, and no matter what transition plan, but a plan that is aligned with the 1.5-degree goal. So for the very first time, we would have moved from reporting regulation to behavioral regulation, and then is when we say, now we're talking.
Thank you, Lena. I think everyone was very happy with your intervention. Thank you for addressing the elephants in the room. Now let's give the word to Tony.
No, yeah, very briefly. I will ask to leadership, to leaders, to public leaders, three things. One is the right mindset, the mindset that the transformation will not happen if it doesn't have economic sense. Economic sense will drive the change at the scale that we need. And we need a massive change on investment. It's a story of investment. It's a story of behavioral change. And I agree that we have to have pricing and the pressure from the citizens. But I would say that without the economic sense of what is need to happen, will not happen. So that's the first thing. The second one is smart policies. To create this behavioral change at a scale and to attract private capital at a scale, we need to develop methodologies, standards, as Europe has done with the taxonomy and others. We need to provide credibility and certainty to the policies that are there. We need to simplify, faster permitting and all other things that are really, really a massive bottleneck. And also we need incentives, to create at sector level, incentives at the offer, but also at demand side, in order to create the dynamic that we need in each sector. And the third ask to leadership would be courage. And I would like to focus on fossil fuel subsidies. According to the IEA, we have double last year to 1 trillion. According to the IMF, we have 7 trillion. That cannot. They have to have the courage to explain that we need to work on a medium term to really, really phase down dramatically the fossil fuel subsidies. And otherwise, we are completely out of the game. So I think that's also another ask to leaders.
Thank you, Tony. Okay. President Alvarado, as a leader How can you answer to this, and what is your position?
No, I was thinking that perhaps the thing that leadership should not have, in this case, is opacity, the opposite of transparency. What's my point? 1.5, and don't get me wrong, it's very necessary as a measurement, but it's an outcome. It's an outcome of who doing what. Let's put the example of Tuvalu. Tuvalu, there's nothing they can do about 1.5, and at the end, 2 decades as a country, they are going to be under the water, disappeared. So it's very opaque. Many of us can work and shout and do lots of things, and we're not going to touch that 1.5. Who has to do what in order to get there? That panel control, it's not necessarily transparent for all to say, oh, because that leads us to discussions like phasing out fossil fuels, for sure, or to finance many of the things we need to happen to get there. There are more than 200 million people in the next decades that are going to be migrating because of climate. They are not going to have the tools to address the movement of that 1.5. But there are others that have those tools. But there's opacity on who has to deliver what. In a company or in an organization in civil society, you have your KPIs, you have your deliverables, and at the end of the quarter, whatever, you check, is it in green, is it in yellow, is it in red? And after several months or quarters of not delivering, if you don't deliver, you're out, you're sacked. But that doesn't happen in politics, and that doesn't happen in this goal, because that scorecard is not clear. And we allowed to be in this world that brings lots of distractions about what's key to get there. And we need to bring the focus back on what we need to deliver and whom needs to deliver what to get there. And I think that not being transparent is part of the problem. We need that from leadership as well, and the capacity and the courage to point it out.
Thank you, President. Lastly, to Marina, we need to finish up because they're going to kill me.
Super
So
quick, because I fully align with Elena. I really loved your answer, and I would bring a leadership a person that is a leader for me, and I think she represents what I would like to say. That's Marina Silva, our Minister of Climate Change and Environment in Brazil, and she always says that we need to realize that we have a cultural transformation, and we have to change from leaders that they want to have to they want to be someone. They want to be able to connect with transformation. And that's what I would love to have in leadership, that people that are less hungry for profit or votes, but really hungry for transformation.
thank you, Marina. Well, I hope they will listen to what the examples that you all have posed. This conversation does not stop here, even though it's going to stop now, because we're going to put all this input into a position paper, and we're going to use it in the second phase of the project to influence decision-making with the network that Club de Madrid has of good democratic leaders. So with that, thank you everyone for being here.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Adriana.